Hello, and thanks for returning to Gosho Readings by Elisa. I'm Elisa, and I'm going to start today's reading with the introduction to the major writings of Nichiren, Daishonin, published in 1999. It's a very long piece, so I will probably divide it into two. So here will be the first 20 minutes or so. Starting introduction. The present volume includes the English translations of 172 works, including both doctrinal theses and letters written by Nichiren Daishonin, who lived from 1222 to 1282. Before proceeding to the translations themselves, a word or two about the historical and cultural background of the period in which Nichiren Daishonin lived may be helpful. In addition, we have included a brief biography of the Daishonin and a summary of his thought, and we conclude with a general description of his writings. We have also provided a glossary and other explanatory materials at the back of the book. Furthermore, a short essay and supplementary notes concerning background and content follow each translation. Historical background. 13th century Japan was ruled by a warrior government whose headquarters was in Kamakura, a seacoast city southwest of present-day Tokyo. The Kamakura shogunate, as the government is commonly known, lasted from 1185 to 1333, and thus this span of time is referred to as the Kamakura period. The Kamakura shogunate, a government organization created and wholly dominated by members of the warrior class, represented a new phenomenon in Japanese history. In the earliest period of Japanese history, if traditional accounts are to be trusted, the emperors exercised military power in person when the occasion demanded. But in the succeeding centuries, the duties of the emperor became increasingly confined to religious and ceremonial functions. An elaborate central and provincial bureaucracy, modeled after that of China, carried out the administration of the affairs of the land, and a conscript army kept order and guarded the frontiers. At the end of the 8th century, so in the late 700s, the emperor bestowed the title of Seitai Shogun, or Great General who subdues the barbarians, on a court official and sent him to conquer the indigenous tribes of the north. The title, abbreviated to Shogun, was to figure prominently in later Japanese history when it came to designate the military ruler of the nation. But at this time, there was as yet nothing like a distinct warrior class or profession. During the long centuries of the Heian period from 794 to 1185, when the capital was located at Heian-kyo, or present-day Kyoto, the situation began to change. The court aristocrats, who headed the Chinese-style bureaucracy mentioned earlier, tended increasingly to pursue artistic and cultural interests in the capital and to neglect the actual administration of government affairs, particularly in the outlying provinces. As a result, a new class of farmer warriors emerged, who were commonly referred to as samurai. By reclaiming or opening up new lands for cultivation in the remoter regions, they succeeded in creating small estates for themselves. To avoid taxation from the central government, their lands were nominally entrusted to powerful aristocratic families or Buddhist temples, but in effect, these constituted private holdings protected by the military prowess of individual samurai. To strengthen their position, the samurai rapidly grouped together or placed themselves in the service of one of the more powerful local clans. Soon they came to constitute a new class of professional warriors, leaving the actual cultivation of their estates to the peasants under their direction and concentrating on the improvement of the military arts and on the ideals of fortitude and daring that supported them. At first, these powerful provincial clans were content, for the most part, to remain aloof from affairs in the capital. There, the imperial institution had come under the absolute domination of the great courtier family known as the Fujiwara. The Fujiwara monopolized the highest offices, married their daughters to the emperors, and placing child rulers on the throne, managed affairs in their name. As a consequence, most Japanese emperors at this time reigned for only a brief time, after which they were obliged to yield the throne to an infant heir and retire to a life of relative seclusion. Fascinating, isn't it? Hmm. In such a complex political situation in which one or more retired emperors lived contemporaneously with a reigning emperor, and various branches of the Fujiwara family vied for supremacy, power clashes were inevitable. When these occurred, the rivals, not surprisingly, attempted to bolster their position by seeking support from the warrior clans of the provinces, some of whom were related to the court aristocracy. Thus, the warriors came to play a part in the affairs of the court and the capital, at first only infrequently, but later with increasing regularity. The branches of the Fujiwara family living in northeastern Japan were among the first to take up such a role. In time, they were overshadowed by two other warrior clans, the Minamoto or Genji, whose holdings were centered in the Kanto region of eastern Japan, and the Taira or Heike, who had their base of power in inland sea region. So that's the Minamoto and the Taira, or the Genji and the Heike. Eventually, the leader of the Taira clan, Taira no Koyemori, from 1118 to 1181, he lived, through his intervention in two successive struggles for power at court, succeeded in becoming the virtual dictator of the nation. He proceeded to install himself in the highest government position, and for the first time in history, reigning and retired emperors and Fujiwara lords alike all found themselves at the mercy of a military leader and his followers. The Taira, however, proved to be no real enemies to the aristocracy, instead taking enthusiastically to the ways of the capital. Before long, they had abandoned their warrior manners and ideals and become indistinguishable from the courtier class. But they had shown to others the way to power. And with the death of Kiyomori in 1181, their position of dominance was swiftly challenged by other warrior clans, headed by the Minamoto family of the East. The Taira were forced to abandon Kyoto and flee west, and suffered a final crushing defeat in 1185 at the naval battle of Dan-ora. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who lived from 1147 to 1199, the leader of the Minamoto forces, was careful not to repeat the mistakes made by the Taira clan. Instead, he established his military government in Kamakura, where it would be safely removed from the influence of the court and its debilitating ways. He made no attempt to dismantle the government machinery already in existence in Kyoto. On the contrary, he deliberately sought acknowledgement of his actions from the emperor and the court. and in 1192 succeeded in obtaining the prestigious military title of shogun. It soon became evident, however, that the administrative functions previously carried out by the court would in the future be increasingly taken over by warrior families under the direction of the Kamakura shogunate. In 1185, Minamoto no Yoritomo appointed shugo, or constables, to keep order in the various provinces, and Jito, excuse me, and Jito, or stewards, to oversee public and private estates. And although these functionaries were ostensibly only handling affairs connected with the warrior class, they soon became the de facto governors of their region. Yoritomo had been assisted in his rise to power by his wife's relatives, members of the Hojo family, a powerful military clan of the Izu region. When Yoritomo died in 1199, he was succeeded as shogun by his 18-year-old son, Yoriie, but actual power was wielded by Yoriie's maternal grandfather, Hojo Tokimasa, 1138 to 1215, who acted as shikken, or regent, for the boy, and eventually had him done away with. Yori's younger brother, Sanetomo, replaced him as shogun in 1203, but was assassinated in 1219, thus bringing to an end the line of Yoritomo's direct descendants. For the remainder of the Kamakura period, the position of shogun was occupied by an infant or child, chosen at first from the Fujiwara family and later from the imperial family. All real authority was exercised by the members of the Hojo family, who held the office of regent for these puppet rulers. The supremacy of the Hojo regents did not go entirely unchallenged. In 1222, the retired emperor Gotoba, along with two other retired emperors, attempted to break free of the shogunate's domination. But though orders were sent out to the provinces to levy troops and raise support for the imperial cause, the number of warriors that responded was pitifully small. The imperial forces were easily defeated, and the Kamakura government deposed the reigning emperor and exiled the retired emperors to distant lands. This incident is known as the Jokyu disturbance, from the name of the era in which it took place. To ensure that nothing like it would occur again, the Hojo family set up a military headquarters in Kyoto to keep watch on the court. The second serious threat to the Hojo power was, in fact, a threat to all Japan that came from abroad. In the past, mainly because of the distance that separated Japan from the continent, the country had seldom had to fear the grim possibility of invasion. But in the 13th century, right, 1200s, a new and ruthless race of conquerors, the Mongols, became active in Asia. In addition to their victories in Central Asia and Europe, they overran northern China and Korea and were in the process of subjugating southern China as well when Japan engaged their attention. In 1268, the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan sent the first of a succession of envoys to Japan to demand that it acknowledge fealty to him. Hojo Tokimune, who headed the shogunate, vehemently rejected the demands and ignored all the subsequent Mongol envoys. In 1274, a Mongol force arrived in the waters off southern Japan to punish the Japanese for their recalcitrance. They overran several small islands and made a landing in Kyushu, but with the onslaught of a severe storm, soon withdrew. The leaders in Kamakura, knowing well that they had not seen the end of the matter, began hurriedly constructing walls and taking other precautions to guard against a second invasion. The Mongols appeared once again in 1281 at the head of a huge fleet of Chinese and Korean vessels. Again, the Japanese put up a fierce resistance, though they suffered terrible losses. Before the Mongols could move the bulk of their forces into action, however, a great storm struck the area, sinking or crippling the ships of the invaders and bringing their expedition to a disastrous conclusion. I will stop here today, and I will continue to finish this very long introduction in a future video. I just wanted to reflect on how interesting it is to finally understand how Nichiren Daishonin addressed his writings sometimes to someone who is not supposedly the chief of the country. And now I understand it's because they were putting these little kids and even babies in that role. And also very interesting, we have this theory in Buddhism of Eshofuni, or the oneness of life and the environment. And we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to protect us and bring the forces of the universe to protect us when it is needed. And how interesting that twice the Mongols attempted to invade, and yet natural storms prevented that from being worse than it could have. If you have any other comments on what you've heard today or look forward to hearing, please feel free to put them in the chat below, and subscribe if you'd like to be notified of more videos, and feel free to look at the earlier recordings of the first few Gosho if that interests you. Thank you so much, and see you next time.